Welcome back, dear listeners, to another episode of An Unexpected Art Lesson, the show where we talk about everything you didn't know about art. This week, we'll be talking about the art and influence of Caravaggio.
I already escaped one lab, I'm not going back to another.
Lab in my hometown's not that bad. They just mess with radiation.
At least you glow in the dark.
And we don't get a whole lot of bad weather because of the radiation bubble. Listeners that grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, if you don't know what that is, look it up and my jokes will make sense. It feels like this technique is often used in more of the horror type games, especially those leaning on the more psychological side.
Most definitely.
Typically in stories, light is good, but in these games, light may not be good. But that doesn't mean the darkness is any better.
No. The darkness may not necessarily be your friend, unless you're playing the video game The Darkness, then in that case, well, actually, even there the darkness isn't your friend.
So, speaking of psychological horror, I see you have a note here about psychological realism.
Yes, I do. This particular note is in regards to Caravaggio's often known approach of capturing authentic human reactions. You can find these types of expressions in certain games where the narrator is what you make of them. However, these particular narrators are not just like the Doom guy where you mow through legions of the dead, or heck, to exterminate. These are characters who you do realize that the way that their actions carry on them. One of the big ones that I would like to mention is definitely Red Dead Redemption 2 from Rockstar Games. Arthur Morgan's face, you do see a lot of complex emotional responses to situations, especially when it is dealing with elements of his past. You get, instead of the Doom guy, I'm not even going to pick on Doom, actually. Doom is the antithesis to this because he doesn't need a reason. It's, you see things that need to go bye-bye, he makes them go bye-bye. Arthur, on the other hand, you do see that when he is forced into some of these situations, these close-ups during particular conversations, it gives you this moral ambiguity through both the expressions and body language that make you wonder, is Arthur on the right side? Are you doing the right thing as the player? And this also helps even when you choose to use the elements of the game's photo mode. It even gives you the chance to capture these Caravaggio-like moments of emotional truth.
Yeah, I personally very much enjoy when you can see what the characters are feeling, which has become more common as technology has advanced to the point where they can better animate that. Part of why that's happening more often in more modern games is they have the ability to do that, but especially when they take specific care and effort to show those moments, especially in the times when the character that is being controlled by the player is having to make a decision where there may not be a right choice. There may not be right answer. You just have to choose the one whose consequences you can live with, and that has an impact.
That is very apt.
I enjoy putting my characters in situations like that because it's fun to see how they figure out how to get out of it.
I feel sometimes my characters just go, oh god, we're going with the violence route, aren't we?
I mean, sometimes violence is the answer.
Exactly. Another game that can be basically quoted as violence is not always the answer. God of War, brought to you by the good folks at Santa Monica. I do love the fact is that Kratos' love refers to him as Grumbles. I really did like citing this game as part of our discussion here because Kratos, up until till the next part of the series, he was known for, well, let's just go with not restrained. One fight, you literally have a rage-filled destroy everything else before you realize the boss has returned. So to see Kratos go from God of Rage to a much more reserved and unsure version of himself, this is the game that helped make you realize that he actually does have these moments of humanity and he is trying to be better. He's also really terrible at it with some of the relationship moments between himself and Atreus through these very subtle expressions where you see Atreus being a kid, he's being loud, he's being curious, he's being excited. And Kratos continues his nickname of Grumbles through a lot of it by, huh. But even with those moments, you see used with these close camera work, the emphasis between hands and faces, especially when Kratos is trying to impart knowledge. These are amazing moments just because you're seeing that range between the two of them, that there is humanity in both of them. Even in God of War's, we're going to go back to God of War's more violent moments, such as when Kratos brings down a massive club on top of a troll's head, and the vulnerability in other scenes where he has to storm Helheim to obtain a reagent to save Atreus' life. At the point where he's about to retrieve it, you see he is exhausted. He's dragging his blades behind him as he cracks this guy apart. There isn't that fire anymore. You see that he may be the God of War, you may have killed this massive creature, but at the same time, you are so tired.
You could only lean into that darkness and destruction for so long before it starts to consume you and wear on you. And now that Kratos has Atreus, has something that could very well be good and have a positive impact that he never could, he created something. And he's felt what it means to create something that he doesn't want to destroy anymore. He doesn't want to just embody destruction. He's carried that mantle too long, and the weight of his past decisions are weighing on him, and you can see it on his face.
Yeah, these are the first games where you see Kratos actually not shrug off his injuries. Beginning of the third game, you get impaled, and he still walks away from that.
Yeah, that speaks volumes. Have 3 games where you could drop a nuke on him, walks away and he's fine. And now maybe it's because he's starting to change. Or he's just getting old. What happens when a god starts to fade? What happens when the God of War doesn't want to be the God of War anymore? He just wants to be dad of boy. I've been waiting for a chance to sneak that in.
Well played. God of War definitely kind of plays off of the David with the head of Goliath from Caravaggio. It explores those themes of violence and its psychological weight in the aftermath.
Especially fits because there's a small child. He doesn't want his son to have to grow up to become him. Especially with how he is right now. Now that he's realizing the consequences of all of his actions and decisions and all of the brutal violence he has done.
I believe the quote was, "There are consequences to killing a god."
Yep. Speaking of consequences to killing a god, there's actually a game out there, 2-player holy punk RPG based on Powered by the Apocalypse system called God Killer, where you are going to kill a god. And even if you successfully kill the god, you still lose something. You still lose a part of yourself. There is a cost. There's even a consequence if you choose to show mercy.
Oh.
The balance and duality of light and dark can be very fun to play with across multiple mediums, because yes, it's a duality, but it's a bit more complicated than that. And you don't know how it's going to be complicated until you see what happens. Which is usually drama.
Mm-hmm. Without dropping a giant club on someone's head.
Yeah. I mean, well, sometimes you just gotta, but it's not always the best choice. It just depends on the situation. The default answer isn't violence.
It is sometimes a default solution, but not always the default option.
We talk a lot about violence in this show.
Well, this one in particular, God of War, it's hard to avoid that one. However, another couple of games that do kind of challenge that, especially involving dramatic composition, where you can portray just as much of a story. 2 mentions of uses here. One would be my personal favorite of Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, brought to you by Ninja Theory, the same people who came up with Dead or Alive Beach Volleyball, so yeah, I'll just leave that one out there.
They have variety. They have range in the things that they create.
I will give you that, because there's literally no other idea I can use here.
Sometimes you just want to play something kind of silly, stupid, and colorful. Other times you want to play something that'll rip your heart out stomping on the ground and just make you feel better afterwards somehow.
Yeah, I believe Senua's Sacrifice falls into the second. This particular game deals with both internal and external factors, so a lot of these situations, you do see these haunting close-ups of Senua's face as particular psychological distresses occur, such as she is not always sure what is reality and what is not. You see these haunting visions that use light and dark to separate reality from hallucinations, so in particular situations where you are in combat with some of these creatures, you are given a way to separate them, but at the same time, you are still up against these creatures that you don't always completely understand. The player is also positioned as this witness to the events. This is not happening much like other Caravaggio pieces, that you're not just playing the game, you're not just watching the scene, you are experiencing her madness. Similar to Caravaggio's approach of placing viewers uncomfortably close in these moments of crisis or transformation.
All this talk about the light versus the dark just makes me think of the improv storytelling, The World of Midst, which is just this fascinating adventure to go on. I highly recommend listening to it, but basically it's set in a universe where you either are in the un or in the fold. The fold is this darkness that just is, and it can have interesting effects on you. And sometimes, if you shoot a laser into the fold, you just get like a bunch of piranhas, a refrigerator, a pack of seagulls, and a single very, very large banana. It's random, but also it can have devastating effects on people. So you either get the black scarring, but sometimes when it's fixed, it's more of this sort of alabaster. And in the the air is full of these tiny filaments of a stuff called mica, which mica can be mined, but mica is also incredibly sharp, and you can fall. You could fall through this space, and if you fall from the main island in the it's called the highest light. If you fall from the highest light, you'll be able to breathe and stuff, but you will be shredded to ribbons before you hit the fold.
Oof. Slices and dices.
The world building is fascinating, especially because Midst is an islet, which islets are basically just almost like asteroids, like floating rocks that are either in the fold or in the Midst is in the middle.
Okay.
It sort of like floats in the fold, and as it rotates, the fold covers the islet.
Fascinating.
It's so cool. Also, it's made by an independent. It was like just a group of 3 friends, and then it was purchased by Critical Role, and they've been providing support, so they have cooler little animations to go with the story, but something you can just sit and listen to.
That's always the fun part.
So, if you want to visit a really interesting world that plays with some of these principles and dynamics, check out Midst. Basically the audio version of some of the things that we're talking about with Caravaggio. Also, it literally starts with Midst Moon exploding and falling into the fold. That's not spoilers, that's episode 1.
Starts on a high note then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that if viewers are curious about that, they will find a link to that on the Instagram as well.
Or just look up Midst, M-I-D-S-T.
Perfect. We've got one last game to talk about here. Death Stranding, brought to you by Kojima Productions, also known as the dude who did Metal Gear and then got fired from Metal Gear.
Awkward.
Oh yeah. Needless to say, though, he has not really strayed from his use of various Caravaggio-like techniques, such as a lot of the scenery does involve figures isolated against these vast landscapes. The game camera has this constantly kind of holds this dramatic framing of the human body in extreme circumstances. Cutscenes that position characters in these asymmetrical. Bleh.
Asymmetrical.
Thank you. You can tell, folks, at this point the caffeine molecules have given up on me.
My first thought when I looked that game up on Google Images, I'm like, oh, it's the one with Norman Reedus' face.
Yep.
Don't you, spend most of the time walking around with the baby in a tank?
Yep.
Yeah. Also, some of the scenery reminds me of the places that you can wander through in the... Well, you do some wandering around interesting landscapes in Mass Effect. It doesn't happen quite as much, but there is quite a bit of that in Dragon Age.
Ooh. Do tell.
In the first Mass Effect game, there are various different planets that you can just land on and drive around looking for things, and they don't always have to do with the main story, but they have these little side stories that you can pick up. Some of them are very, very spiky and very much a pain in the butt to drive around. Some look like idyllic places to live, others are covered in lava, some it snows. There are many, many times where you can just park your Nomad, which is the vehicle you use, and look up. And you're just this tiny vehicle in this big, gorgeous scene, especially there's a quest that sends you to the moon. So you get to look up at Earth. And it's stunning and it makes you feel so small. And in Dragon Age, specifically Dragon Age Inquisition, has more of the wandering around these incredibly large landscapes. And cutscenes where sometimes you get to see just how big the threat is or how big the world is.
Yeah, those are, again, great examples of how Caravaggio's skill is, or his ideas and his techniques have been brought into video games.
And one day I might have a game outside of those two to reference, but those are two of my favorite franchises. And often when I'm working and it's not audio editing, I do have party banter pulled up in the background. I don't know why it helps me focus, but it does.
Hey, if it works, it works.
I've heard it all before. I know most of these conversations. I'm not going to accidentally spoil anything, which is why I have been avoiding listening to the Veilguard party banter like the plague as much as I really want to.
Technical support is working as quickly as they can on that request.
All good. I understand technical support is busy. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of An Unexpected Art Lesson, the show where we talk about everything you didn't know about art. Stay tuned next week to hear Watson and I continue discussing the art and influence of Caravaggio. If you like what we're doing, you can follow us on social media and join the conversation over at An Unexpected Art Lesson on Threads, Blue Sky, and Substack. And you can also support us over on Patreon. Get early access to episodes and other fun things at patreon.com/anunexpectedartlesson.